The ticket stub sits on my desk right now, faded and torn at the edges, the ink barely readable after 4 decades in my wallet. Theater 47, row M, seat 12, Tuesday evening. No date that I can make out anymore, but I remember everything else about that night. How could I forget the moment that changed how I understood what presence really means? I was 23 and working nights at the insurance office downtown. Tuesday was my only free evening, and I'd developed a habit of catching whatever was playing at the small theaters scattered around the city. Not the big venues where touring Broadway shows stopped, but the intimate spaces where local actors worked for gas money and the love of the craft. Theater 47 was the smallest of them all, maybe 60 seats in total, tucked between a laundromat and a corner deli that always smelled like pastrami and regret. That particular Tuesday, I almost didn't go. The weather was terrible. A cold rain that cut through your jacket and soaked into your bones. The kind of night when staying home with a book and a cup of coffee seemed like the only reasonable choice. But something drew me out anyway. Maybe it was the loneliness of my apartment, or maybe it was that restless energy that comes when you're young and still believe that the next experience might change everything. I bought my ticket from a woman who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. $7, which was real money back then. She glanced at the nearly empty theater behind her and shrugged. "Might want to sit up front tonight," she said. Not much of a crowd. But I always sat in the back. It was my habit, my comfort zone, the place where I could observe without being observed. Theater 47 was a study in faded elegance. Red velvet seats that had seen better decades, a stage that creaked when you walked across it, and lighting that was more suggestion than illumination. The kind of place where serious actors went to stay sharp between paying gigs, where directors experimented with material that would never see a commercial stage. That night, there were exactly 11 other people in the audience. I counted them as they settled into their seats, mostly older folks who looked like they came to everything. The dedicated theater lovers who showed up rain or shine. A couple in their 70s holding hands in the third row. A middle-aged woman with a notepad who might have been a reviewer. A few scattered individuals like myself, drawn by curiosity or habit, or the simple need to be somewhere other than home. The program was a single sheet of paper, photocopied and slightly off-center. An evening of dramatic readings, it announced, followed by a list of pieces I didn't recognize. Classic scenes, modern monologues, poetry. No names of the performers, which struck me as odd even then. Usually, local theater programs were full of biographies and headshots, actors eager to be known, to be remembered, to build their reputations one small audience at a time. But not that night. That night was different from the moment the house lights dimmed. The stage was bare except for a single chair and a small table with a glass of water. No elaborate set, no costumes, just the essentials. When the work light came up, it created a perfect circle of warm illumination against the black void of the rest of the stage. And then he walked into that circle. I had never seen him before, this tall man with graying hair and eyes that seemed to see everything at once. He moved with a deliberate pace that immediately commanded attention, not through any dramatic gesture or theatrical flourish, but through something much more subtle and powerful. It was the way he inhabited space, the way he seemed completely at ease in his own skin, the way he made silence feel full rather than empty. He didn't introduce himself, didn't thank us for coming, or make any of the usual small talk that performers use to warm up an audience. He simply sat down in the chair, looked out at our small gathering with those penetrating eyes, and began to speak. No script in his hands, no notes on the table. Just him and us, and the words that seemed to flow from some deep well of understanding. The first piece was Shakespeare, something from King Lear, but it wasn't performed in the grand, declamatory style you might expect. Instead, It was intimate, conversational, as if this man was sharing a private pain with close friends rather than performing for an audience. Every word was weighted with meaning, every pause filled with intention. He wasn't just reciting lines, he was living them, breathing them, making them new again. But it wasn't just his voice, though. That was certainly part of it. That deep, resonant quality that seemed to vibrate in your chest rather than just reach your ears. It was something more fundamental than vocal technique. It was presence in its purest form, the rare ability to hold space with complete authority while remaining utterly vulnerable. I found myself leaning forward in my seat without realizing it. Around me, I could see the same thing happening to the other audience members. The woman with the notepad had stopped writing. The elderly couple sat motionless, their hands still clasped, but their attention completely captured. Even the late arrivals who had slipped in during the first few minutes stopped rustling in their seats and became perfectly still. This unknown actor was doing something that I had only read about in books, something that theater theorists call commanding the room. But seeing it happen was entirely different from reading about it. He wasn't demanding our attention through volume or movement or theatrical tricks. He was earning it through the simple act of being completely present, completely committed to the moment, completely honest in his delivery. When he finished the Shakespeare and moved on to a piece of contemporary poetry about loss and memory, something shifted in the room. The air itself seemed to thicken with emotion. Without raising his voice or changing his physical position, he had somehow transported all 12 of us from our individual experiences into a shared emotional space. We were no longer separate audience members watching a performance. We had become a community, united by our witness to something extraordinary. What struck me most was how he used silence. Between pieces, he would sit quietly for long moments, not in the awkward way of someone who had forgotten their lines, but with the confidence of someone who understood that silence could be as powerful as words. During those pauses, you could hear everything: the subtle creaking of the old building, the distant sound of traffic on wet streets, the collective breathing of 12 strangers who had been temporarily transformed into something approaching family. He performed for nearly 2 hours, moving through a carefully curated selection of material that seemed designed to explore every aspect of the human experience: joy and sorrow, hope and despair, love and loss, triumph and failure. Each piece was distinct, yet they all felt connected, like chapters in a larger story about what it means to be alive, to struggle, to endure. The final piece was a poem I didn't recognize, something about the weight of dreams and the courage required to keep believing in them even when the world offers little evidence that such belief is justified. As he spoke those final words, his voice dropped to barely above a whisper, yet somehow every syllable carried to the back of the theater with perfect clarity. It was as if he understood exactly how to use the space, how to make the room itself an instrument of his performance. When he finished, there was no immediate applause. The silence stretched on for what felt like minutes, but was probably only seconds, all of us reluctant to break the spell he had woven. Finally, the elderly gentleman in the third row began to clap, and the rest of us joined in, but it felt insufficient somehow. Applause seemed too ordinary a response to what we had just witnessed. The actor stood, nodded once to acknowledge our appreciation, and walked off the stage with the same deliberate grace with which he had entered. No curtain call, no bows, no attempt to milk the moment for additional approval. He was simply there, and then he was gone, leaving us sitting in our seats, trying to process what had just occurred. I stayed until the house lights came up, reluctant to leave, hoping perhaps that he would return or that someone would explain who he was. But the theater emptied quickly, the other audience members filing out into the rainy night with the satisfied expressions of people who knew they had experienced something special. The woman who had sold me the ticket was already gone, and there was no one left to ask about the mysterious performer. I walked home through the rain in a kind of daze, my mind replaying moments from the performance, trying to understand what had made it so powerful. It wasn't just technical skill, though he clearly possessed that in abundance. It wasn't charisma in the traditional sense, though he certainly commanded attention. It was something deeper, more fundamental. It was the quality of absolute authenticity, the sense that this person was exactly who he appeared to be, with no artifice, no false layers, no performance of personality. That night marked the beginning of what I can only call an obsession. Not with the man himself, whom I didn't know and might never see again, but with the experience he had created. I found myself returning to Theater 47 week after week, hoping to catch him in another performance. But he never appeared again. The woman at the box office claimed not to know who I was talking about when I described him. "We have lots of actors come through here," she said with the weary patience of someone who dealt with theater enthusiasts on a regular basis. I started attending performances at other small venues around the city, always hoping to encounter that same quality of presence, that same level of authentic connection. I saw good actors, skilled performers who knew their craft and delivered their lines with professional competence, but none of them had that mysterious quality that had made that Tuesday night so unforgettable. The ticket stub became a kind of talisman. I carried it with me wherever I went, transferring it from wallet to wallet over the years, a physical reminder of an experience that had shaped my understanding of what art could accomplish. Friends who saw it would ask about it, and I would try to explain what had happened that night, but the words always felt inadequate. How do you describe the feeling of being truly seen by a stranger? How do you capture the experience of watching someone transform an ordinary evening into something approaching sacred? Life went on, as life does. I changed jobs, moved to different cities, got married, had children, built a career in a field that had nothing to do with theater. But that Tuesday night remained vivid in my memory, a touchstone I returned to whenever I needed to remember what excellence looked like, what it felt like to witness someone operating at the absolute peak of their abilities. Sometimes I would dream about it, not dramatic dreams or nightmares, but quiet dreams where I was back in seat 12, row M, watching this unknown actor command the stage with nothing but his presence and his voice. In the dreams, the performance would go on forever, an endless stream of stories and poems and monologues that somehow contained all the wisdom and beauty and pain in the world. I would wake from these dreams with a sense of loss, as if something precious had been taken from me. I tried to research the performance, spending hours in libraries looking through old theater programs and newspaper archives, hoping to find some record of that evening, some clue to the identity of the performer. But Theater 47 had closed years later, and their records, if they had kept any, had disappeared. It was as if that night had existed outside of normal time and space, a perfect moment that left no trace except in the memories of the 12 people who had been there to witness it. When the internet became part of daily life, I redoubled my efforts. I searched for Theater 47, for dramatic readings Tuesday evening, for any combination of keywords that might lead me back to that night. I joined online forums for theater enthusiasts, posted descriptions of the performance, asked if anyone remembered being there. Nothing. It was as if I had imagined the whole thing, except for the faded ticket stub that proved otherwise. I began to wonder if I was becoming one of those people who cling to a single perfect moment, unable to move forward, trapped by nostalgia for an experience that, however meaningful, belonged to the past. My wife would find me late at night, scrolling through theater websites and archive databases, and she would gently suggest that perhaps I was giving too much importance to something that, while clearly significant to me, was just a performance by a local actor. But I knew it was more than that. The experience had taught me something fundamental about the difference between competence and artistry, between skill and true mastery. It had shown me what was possible when someone brought their complete self to their work, holding nothing back, offering everything they had in service of something larger than their own ego or ambition. And then, 37 years after that rainy Tuesday night, I was watching television with my grandson. He was channel surfing, looking for cartoons, when he stopped on a documentary about American cinema. The narrator's voice was distinctive, authoritative, yet warm, the kind of voice that commanded attention without demanding it. Something about it made me look up from my book. "That's Morgan Freeman," my grandson said matter-of-factly, as if everyone should know such things. "He's in all the movies." "Grandpa, did you know he started out as a nobody? It says here he spent years doing small theater before anyone knew who he was." The image on the screen was of an older Morgan Freeman, the familiar face known to millions, but something about his eyes, something about the way he held himself, sent a shock of recognition through me that was so powerful I nearly dropped my book. I stared at the television, my heart pounding, as archival footage showed a much younger version of this now famous actor performing in various small venues. And then I knew with absolute certainty that I had been in the presence of greatness long before the world recognized it. The unknown actor who had haunted my dreams for decades was Morgan Freeman, caught in that perfect moment before fame changed everything, when he was still honing his craft in small theaters for audiences of 12, perfecting that extraordinary presence that would eventually captivate millions. The ticket stub is still on my desk, but now it means something different. It's not just a memento of a perfect evening. It's proof of something I've spent 40 years trying to understand. True artistry doesn't need recognition to be complete. Greatness isn't created by fame or success or the approval of large audiences. It exists independent of all those things, in the quality of attention an artist brings to their work, in the depth of their commitment to truth and authenticity. Morgan Freeman was already Morgan Freeman that night in Theater 47, even though none of us knew his name. His gift wasn't discovered when Hollywood finally noticed him. It was already there, fully formed, waiting for the right moment to reach a larger audience. The 12 of us were privileged to witness artistry in its purest form, unmediated by celebrity or commercial consideration, just a master craftsman practicing his art with complete dedication and profound skill. I understand now why that performance haunted my dreams. It wasn't just because it was beautiful or moving or technically impressive, though it was all of those things. It was because I had witnessed something rare and precious, the moment when talent transcends itself and becomes something approaching magic. In a world full of artificial experiences and manufactured emotions, I had seen something absolutely real, absolutely honest, absolutely true. The ticket stub will go with me to my grave, I suppose, this small piece of paper that connects me to one of the most significant evenings of my life. My grandson thinks I'm silly for keeping it, but he's young and doesn't yet understand how rare it is to witness greatness in its formative stages. Someday, perhaps, he'll have his own version of that Tuesday night, his own encounter with excellence that changes how he sees the world. What I learned that night is that the best art happens when the artist forgets about being an artist and simply becomes a conduit for truth. Morgan Freeman understood this instinctively, even then. He didn't perform for us that night. He shared with us, offered us pieces of himself and his understanding of what it means to be human. The fact that he later became one of the most recognizable voices in American cinema seems almost beside the point. The real revelation is that greatness was always there, waiting to be recognized, content to exist, whether anyone was paying attention or not. In our celebrity-obsessed culture, we often think that fame creates talent, but that night taught me the opposite truth. Talent creates itself, in small theaters and empty rooms, in moments of perfect authenticity, when the audience disappears and only the truth remains. I kept the ticket stub for 40 years because some experiences are too precious to let go, too meaningful to reduce to mere memory. That unknown actor changed my understanding of what human beings are capable of when they bring their complete selves to their work. The fact that the world eventually caught up to what I witnessed that night only confirms what I already knew. I had been in the presence of something extraordinary, something that would have been just as extraordinary whether anyone ever learned his name or not.